Hey everyone, it's Rob, and I'm going to jump right into it today's current news and analysis talking about Europe's special payment vehicle with Iran to facilitate trade with Iran and how that relates to the US dollar's dominance as a world reserve currency. I had done quite a few videos before talking about how the era of the US dollar as a reserve currency may be coming to an end. We talked about how China may be manipulating currencies and how other countries, including China, are doing deals outside the U.S. to trade outside of the dollar, particularly in oil, and now that's expanding to other trade agreements. Due to sanctions with Iran, Europe has to get out of the U.S. SWIFT system in order to do trade and not be subject to the sanctions. And what the SWIFT system is the wire transfer, the money transfer system that facilitates all this dollar-based trade around the world. And here in the Wall Street Journal, they're announcing that the European Union's announcement that it would establish a special payments channel to maintain economic ties with Iran sent a clear message to Tehran and Washington. Europe is intent on trying to save the 2015 nuclear deal. I've got another article here from Channel New Asia. EU announces legal entity to maintain business with Iran. It says here, with the United States and the dollar dominating so much of global trade, the statement said the new mechanism would facilitate payments related to Iran's exports, including oil, and imports, which will assist with and reassure economic operators pursuing legitimate business with Iran. That particular paragraph is extremely important, and the reason being is Iran has one of the largest oil reserves left in the world. And if they're facilitating trade outside the U.S. dollar and the U.S. SWIFT system, that means the petrodollar is basically dead at this point, because without Iran's oil reserves in that petrodollar system, the petrodollar is effectively no more. Because we know a lot of the other countries that use that system are either getting out of that system that have the oil reserves, or the ones that are staying in are the ones where the oil reserves are starting to fade off. It goes on to say, in practical terms, this means that the EU member states will set up a legal entity to facilitate legitimate financial transactions with Iran, and this will allow European companies to continue to trade with Iran in accordance with European law and could be open partners in the world. So that's basically hinting at that this could involve other parties as well eventually. Bloomberg had an opinion on this, and it states Europe finally has an excuse to challenge the dollar. The plan for a special purpose vehicle to bypass U.S. sanctions on Iran could test American dominance of the global financial system. The Bloomberg opinion is actually coming out and saying what I've said before. It says down here, and the paragraphs really aren't set up very well, but I'm going to highlight the first few words of the sentence so you guys can read it. I don't know what's wrong with the spacing in this Bloomberg article. But it says, creating a defensible banking architecture may well be the end goal for the Europeans, China, and Russia anyway. Iran is only a convenient pretext. The nuclear agreement is one of the few things that unite the EU, Russia, and China against the U.S. But working to undermine the dollar's global dominance isn't ultimately about Iran at all. In his recent State of European Union speech, European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker called for strengthening the euro's international role and moving away from traditional dollar invoicing and foreign trade. Again, they're talking about getting rid of the dollar in foreign trade. The opinion in this article goes on to say, no currency's international dominance has lasted forever, and this is something that I have pointed out, and it's true. It's true 100% of the cases. There's no reason for the U.S. dollar to be the exception to this rule. Trump's confidence in his ability to weaponize the dollar against adversaries and stubborn allies alike would eventually backfire for the U.S. as efforts to push the dollar off its pedestal grow ever more serious. So we can see countries getting out of the dollar trade. I'd also said in a recent article that the flight to the dollar in U.S. Treasuries is beginning as the emerging markets begin to burn up, and that is true. People are still using the U.S. dollar for trade, and they're investing in U.S. securities, although that's going to start to fall down as these agreements to move away from the U.S. dollar occur and as recession occurs in the U.S. So as you see the recession start to occur in the U.S., people aren't going to stay in the dollar in the Treasury for long. You're going to hear a giant sucking sound, and they're going to be dumping their dollars in treasuries, and they're going to be going into these other currencies using these other payment vehicles that are already being set up around the world. So this time will be different in that when we hit recession, the U.S. dollar and the Treasury aren't going to stay strong. There's going to be every reason for those to begin their final collapse, and it will end the U.S.'s dollar dominance around the world. That doesn't mean it's necessarily going to completely kill off the dollar. I think the hyperinflation will do that once the interest on the debt becomes too excessive to pay and the Fed begins to dump money. So I think it's going to happen in stages. We're going to see the dollar being de-emphasized. We're going to see the dollar strengthen and then start to to eventually weaken again. We see the dollar's already began to roll over and weaken a little bit, but I don't think that's the big weakening. I think it's the small part of the weakening. I think the big weakening is going to happen as the U.S. starts to hit recession, and that as it hits recession and the interest rates go up, it's going to affect the debt and the interest payments. The Fed at some point will start dropping the helicopter money. That will react into hyperinflation, and that will kill the dollar. That's the path that we're on. And this is really important to understand. Trump is trying to do his best to salvage U.S. trade. He had a press conference today, basically going on the tail end of it as I'm recording this. I was actually listening to the majority of it before recording the video this afternoon. And I wanted to address that as well. He's talking to the press about, we have these trade deficits with Japan and China and some of these other countries, and he's asking them, why are we protecting them when they're making money off of our economy and we have trade deficits with them? In China, they sell us a lot of stuff. In Japan, a lot of it's automobiles and other sectors, automobiles leading the trade deficit. Trump's trying to get rid of these trade deficits. If he can get rid of some of the trade deficits, the dollar can continue as a currency, or we can reset to some other currency without a complete collapse of our system. And we could also go to gold backing of the dollar. We cannot go to gold backing of the U.S. dollar right now because of the trade deficits. Because what's going to happen is people are going to turn in their treasuries and their dollars for the gold, and they're going to take all our gold reserves. So the first thing that Trump needs to do to save the American economy is get rid of these trade deficits. And he's hinting at people, basically saying, why are we spending all these billions of dollars protecting you with our military if you're taking advantage of us in these trade agreements? Okay, so he's putting pressure on these countries to basically say, I can, in a foreshadowing the fact that he could eventually remove the protection of the military for them and try to get them to work on the trade agreements. I don't know ultimately if that's going to work. I think it'll work to an extent. I don't think it's going to erase the entire trade deficit the U.S. has with these nations, but I think Trump is putting the world on watch. The question will be, how much can Trump do before people are seriously out of the dollar, the recession hits the U.S., and the pressure begins to hit the bond rates and the interest expense that we have? Okay, we lowered our corporate taxes. We're talking about lowering individual taxes. At the same time, our bond rates could go up and our economy could begin to weaken in recession as the inflation is exported from the emerging markets that they're having now. See, this is a worldwide market. The emerging markets aren't going to just sit here and burn, especially China, Germany, Europe, and Latin America, while the U.S. does well. Eventually, that'll come back to the U.S. So Trump's got to solve some of these problems before the recession hits. I don't think he's going to solve them all. Okay, I think we're going to hit recession, the dollar's going to weaken, and eventually the dollar will hyperinflate. However, if we can start to reduce some of the trade, begin to create more business in the U.S., we can recover from that a lot more quickly, and we can go back to a gold-based currency standard or gold as a currency. We cannot do that right now, so Trump is kind of hamstrung and moving forward with some of the policies he wants. He's said he's a gold bug, and he wants to use gold potentially as a currency or to strengthen the U.S. currency. He also wants to get rid of the trade deficits and create more manufacturing home. From an economic standpoint, he's absolutely correct. And I just don't know if he's going to be able to get there. So I think everybody needs to brace and buckle down for what's coming. The U.S. dollar is no longer the trade vehicle of the world. That's official with these articles. Okay, if you had been sleeping under a rock or you just don't pay attention to financial news and you're seeing this video, go read these stories. Okay, go to Bloomberg, go look it up on the internet. You'll find 50 stories about this within the last week. It's something that you need to pay attention to. Also, if you're saving in U.S. dollars or U.S. dollar denominated assets, you may want to come out of those assets, especially if they're in paper. And you may want to put your money into safer vehicles. As well, if there's problem in the bond markets, which eventually affects the currency markets, which it will, you don't want to have a lot of money in your bank account because that's going to create bank solvency issues, and the bail-in laws are already being put on the books to take that away from you. I've got a video on that up as well. Go to my channel and look up those videos. Okay, I'm going to make this short. This is a little bit under 10 minutes. That's current news analysis for today. This is Rob on the Sui Juris channel. If you like it, please give it a thumbs up and comment and subscribe. Till next time.